Hello and welcome. This is Springbrook's Flipped Class. I have Brother Kenneth Martin here. Hi, Kenneth.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good. We're going to have a conversation today. We're talking about the revelation. We're talking about revelation in our times and how we experience those in everyday life. We've just had almost a whole quarter of classes about the book of Revelation, and so what does that mean, and how do we get into that? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Hopefully you can join us on Sunday, where we'll have a little bit more discussion and we'll dive into this topic even more. So for those of you who don't know Brother Kenneth very well, I just wanted you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your story, kind of where you grew up and how you got connected here at Springbrook.
Okay. I'm obviously my name's Kenneth Martin. I was born and raised right here in Washington State. I know that's kind of rare because most people end up here from other places. But I was born here and raised here in Washington, for the most part, Seattle, the whole time. I lived in Seattle, went to school in Seattle, went to Rainier Beach High School, which is where I graduated from. Previous to that, I went to Cleveland High School. All throughout my childhood and teenage years and early years, I tended to go to the inner city churches of Christ because that's where I'm from, the inner city. So we tend to worship at whether it was Holgate, Madison Park, or South Side, Graham Street. It was all the churches that we worshiped that were generally within a certain proximity of where we lived. And so moving forward, now that I live in, I suppose this is considered a suburban part of Auburn, is where I live now. We moved out here in March of last year. And so it will be 2 years actually, us being here March of 2021. So we decided to take a look at the various churches in the area that we lived in because typically we didn't want to travel an hour or two just to go to church on Sunday. And so we had previously visited Springbrook in the past. And so Springbrook was pretty much on our radar for places to attend church because of the commute.
Yeah.
And that's where we are now.
Yeah, it's been good to see you guys from before the pandemic. We've been kind of. I know you've been isolated. Your father is in the high risk category, and so you've been kind of sticking to yourselves. But it'll be good once we can start meeting together again. I wanted to discuss with you what kind of startled you the most, or what caught your attention the most during this strange new time.
I think what caught my attention the most was the fact that it caused a huge social and economic disruption in terms of people suddenly kind of not interacting the way they used to in the past. People not having parties like they did in the past, and economically, of course, that was the biggie. That was the big one because initially they shut down all kinds of businesses, restaurants, gyms. Most businesses were shut down because of this pandemic. And that was a huge economic disruption in itself because businesses were no longer making money. Restaurants had to close. A lot of people were unable to pay their rent and their mortgages. And so I think to me, that was one of the biggest concerns that I had with it was all the people that, especially those that were kind of living from paycheck to paycheck, which is not a bad place to be, but some people are in that position. But when that paycheck stopped coming because of this COVID-19, it immediately placed a lot of people in the position to be faced with homelessness for the first time in their lives. And a lot of people had to be faced with situations like, how are they going to eat? Things that they took for granted in the past, groceries, and from what I've heard and seen on the news, quite a few people are actually sleeping in cars. A lot of people have had to move back home, and there's been a lot of a huge disruption in people's personal lives because they're no longer able to sustain or take care of themselves financially. And so we're talking tens of millions of people.
Yeah.
And so that to me was the biggest impact that I noticed on this whole thing, was how many people were affected by it because of loss of jobs. Once a person has their jobs taken out from under them, that's your lifeline to actually living in this world. No paycheck, no food, can't pay your rent. How do you survive without a paycheck?
Yeah.
And so we have millions of people across the nation who have been affected by that.
It reminds me of one of those games that you can go to like play at a arcade, where you put the quarter in and then it drops down onto the table, and it's constantly pushing the rest of the quarters forward. And if you put one in, and every once in a while it'll hit everything just right, so a bunch of quarters fall off. It's like it's like it seemed. I think we all thought that we were a lot further away from the edge than we actually were when this whole thing started. And so,
exactly,
a few people losing their jobs is one thing, but when that starts dominoing, and then it just affects whole communities. And yeah,
exactly. I mean, a lot of families were just one paycheck away from being in poverty. One paycheck. And you multiply that times multiple pay periods. Where does that put families? In the streets.
Yep.
So it's a terrible place that we're in right now for millions of people.
Yep. Yeah, we'll definitely need to keep our eye on that as we try. We're going to try and go back to normal, whatever that's going to mean. For a lot of people, things have changed permanently. So the next thing I was hoping to get your thoughts on was, so it was about 2 months into the lockdown when the world kind of witnessed the death of George Floyd. A police officer sat on his neck for like 8 minutes, and they were denying him any care or treatment as he kind of pleaded and begged for his life. For me, this was certainly a revelation. It kind of stopped me. I had heard that a black man was killed by the police. I'd seen the name of George Floyd in a headline or two, but I brought a bunch of assumptions to that, and then when I finally sat down and investigated it and watched the video and all that, it was a revelation, because I'd never seen such a dehumanizing travesty as that.
Right.
And it was just so clearly a miscarriage of justice committed by a police officer whom for me, that the police have been always a sign of justice, or a sign of somebody that we can trust. From some of my black friends, they had very different revelations. Some were surprised and frustrated that people like me were just now realizing that things like this happen on a regular basis. Revelations like that. And so I was just wondering, what did you, what kind of revelations did you go through as you saw this go down, if any?
Obviously I was not happy with what I saw on that video of a man being, some would say executed, others would say, that the police decided to be the judge, jury, and executioner right there on the spot. But at the same time, I found myself being somewhat frustrated, and then also, I also realized that this whole action caused a global movement to happen to bring the attention to the rest of the world that this potentially happens all the time. It just so happened that now we live in an age of video footage. Everyone has a cell phone. And so anything that happens publicly can potentially be recorded by people with telephones and things. And of course, police officers have these body cams and things like that. And so, like I said, I think I'm saddened, that it happened, and I feel so much saddened. I'm deeply saddened for his family, but at the same time, I'm glad that it happened, not because that happened, but because the world could actually see for themselves what happens here in the real world. This is what really happens in the real world, and I'm quite sure there's tens of thousands of people who have experienced injustices by law enforcement officials, but it was never recorded. No one was around with a cell phone, and like I said, the world has an opportunity to see exactly what happens in the real world. And so, again, like I said, I was deeply saddened to see that it was sort of like a public execution by a public servant.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's interesting to hear that perspective. I'm glad you're
Mhm.
sharing it. I think sometimes we kind of get into these bubbles where we don't ask for other people's perspective or take the time to listen to them. So
And it could be possibly that we just assume that police officers are going to be around to protect and serve. There's this mindset that everybody thinks they're around to protect and serve, and for the most part, a huge percentage of them are doing their jobs the way they're supposed to. But I believe there's bad apples in every job.
mm-hmm.
I mean, we need law enforcement, we need the police, but there's officers out here that are operating above the law, and those are the ones that give the good police officers a bad name. And as I grew up in the inner city, quite a few of my friends had been assaulted by police officers, and back in the 70s they didn't have 60s and 70s, there weren't cell phones with cameras. There was nothing there to record what an officer was saying or doing to you, and therefore, and quite naturally, it was your word against the officers, and the officer's word always stood. But we're living in a video age now, a modern age where officers have to be held at a higher standard and understand that they are potentially being recorded.
Yeah.
And so when I heard about George Floyd and witnessed the video myself, I was saddened but not surprised. And I say that word, not surprised, because of the people that I know who have been assaulted by cops and other stories. It's not a surprise to some groups of people like myself. It's not a surprise.
Yeah. It reminds me again of the metaphor we were just discussing about the coins.
Oh yeah.
People on the edges of society are a lot closer to that edge, and so when you have a bad police officer, when you have economic hardship, they're a lot closer, and they're going to take the brunt of these injustices, or these bad things that are happening. So the other thing that I wanted to pick your brain about is I've noticed a pattern with major events. Maybe you've noticed this too. Usually something significant happens, or sometimes it's even something that's like not significant at all. But it just captures people's imaginations for whatever reasons. It starts trending. It's viral for whatever reason. And then basically people start giving their hot takes on what we're supposed to think about this, or why this is good or why this is bad. And then it quickly kind of evolves. Each clan, each little group of people takes a side. They demand that everybody else take sides, and then we get into this breakdown of discussion. Just starts turning into arguing. Have you noticed the same thing in our culture?
Right, and I agree with you, because generally speaking, people are going to take a side on whatever the issue happens to be, and sometimes the side that they take has a lot to do with what they personally know about the subject. I mean, we could be talking about politics, we could be talking about law enforcement, we could be talking about anything. And so a lot of people bring to the table education and experience based on whatever the subject matter might be. And so they're going to take sides based upon what they know to be true in terms of their education and or experience. And so others, it may just take sides because they don't know, they don't have the educational background or any experience in that area. So they just pick a side and go with it, you know, and I think that's common. I mean, it comes down to the fact that everyone's entitled to an opinion,
Mhm.
regardless to what's going on around us, you know, and I think everybody's opinion matters. And um, I just think it's good that, you know, we hear both sides, hear everybody's opinion on whatever the subject happens to be. That's kind of my take on it. You know, people will take sides on whatever's going on in the world, and a lot of them take sides based upon what they know to be true, what they've obviously, in some cases, have seen with their own two eyes. You know, I mean, you take the George Floyd issue for example. This entire world saw what they saw. We all saw the same thing. It was caught on tape. However, there's conflicting stories about certain parts of his death, you know, and you know, you have to wonder, well, how can there be a conflict when we all saw the same thing?
It almost seems like we're unable to look past the little tribes that we've made in our culture in order to see what's true. We're all trying to bend and shape the truth into the right story that fits our narrative and makes us feel like we're on the right side and we're doing the right thing. So, what effect do you think that this kind of this way to view the world, this tribal thinking, what do you think that has? What effect that has on our ability to see what God is doing in the world around us?
Well, you know, those of us in this world who are Christians, we're seeing a lot of this stuff play out in front of us a little bit differently than maybe a lot of the rest of the world. We're looking at a lot of this from a spiritual standpoint. And I've had this conversation with other people regarding COVID-19, for example. Many people have compared this to the plagues in the Bible, for example. You know, there was a lot of plagues, Egypt, and where they came from. And then people are also making a comparative statement to COVID-19 to where it came from, and you know, they're basically saying the same thing. Well, this is a modern day plague, is what I've heard from a lot of people. And so my personal belief is that the Lord is trying to get this world's attention. You know, I just think that this is one of the Lord's ways of trying to get this world's attention, because this pandemic it's a global thing. It's not just New York City. It's not just California. It's not just Alaska. It's not one place that's been affected by this. And so the only entity that I can think of that can affect the entire world at the same time and get the entire world's attention by some means is the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so he chooses to get our attention the way he chooses to get our attention. And,
Yeah, I think that's one of the ideas that we've been trying to get across in our Revelation study, is that you know, we can have these modern revelations if we have the eyes to see what's going on around us, if we're capable of taking you know, what seems like everyday events, but just like John, where we can take on this divine view of earthly events. You know, we can look on it from above and see that, you know, God has a way that he wants things done. Like that's how things are done in his kingdom. And so I'm just imagining, you know, for the pandemic, what, you know, economically, if we're not part of a sustainable economic community, right? If we have so many people that are living paycheck to paycheck and right on the margin, and you know, a disruption like this causes 20 million people to lose their jobs, and then half of them are going to lose their house in the next month. If you don't take an event like that and step back and look at it, like you were saying, from a spiritual perspective, then you're really doing a disservice to this time, because it's completely horrific what's going on, right? We have but we have thousands, million people dead around the world from this thing, and to just want to go back to the way things were is a disservice to the people that are dying from this, and also the people that are still going to be suffering in the next few months.
Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways, and it could very well be that this is one way to get a lot of this world's attention spiritually, and to draw closer to Him. I don't know the mind of God, because I'm not God, obviously, but when I think about all the millions of people who are without food, who've lost homes and apartments, this whole thing may cause some people to get down on their knees and start praying.
Yeah.
To try to get a spiritual connection or some kind of personal relationship with the Lord. So there's a couple of ways to look at it. It's a very good possibility that there's a lot more people now praying during this pandemic than that were praying before the pandemic.
Yeah. I think that's all the questions that I had for today. But is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrapped up today?
No, I think that's pretty much it. I appreciate you having me on, and I also just wanted to add not only the George Floyd situation that took place, but we have the pandemic, and then we have a lot going on politically also. We have things that are being said publicly that, of course, the world has never heard or seen before when you look at the politics going on, because we're very near, we're in an election year, obviously. We have a new president that's coming on board, and there's a lot going on there in that whole arena that we've never seen or heard from the highest levels of government.
Yeah.
So, we just take a look at all of the stuff going on in politics now. We can see that there's if you tie it in to not only the pandemic but everything else, it's just it's like a new norm of some sort that we're living in right now. I think that we people as Christians, we need to just continue to draw closer to the Lord, no matter what we hear, no matter what we see going on around us. Just get closer to the Lord, continue to ask for His protection and guidance through this entire mess that this world is in right now. That would be my take or my advice to give anyone. Get closer to the Lord, and not be surprised at what you hear or see going on around you.
Yeah.
Just closer to God.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. We talked about that in our flip class on Sunday. We talked about how prostitute of Babylon, and then the beasts, and how they destroy themselves, and these systems that are built on injustice and taking advantage of the poor, and all those systems eventually kind of eat themselves, and how the Christians through the millennia, we aren't the people that God wants to swoop in when things are broken and take over and put our will in place and take power. We're the people who swoop in, and we take care of the least of these. We get to people on the fringes, and we minister to them. So I think you're absolutely right that as you know, we're on this very fragile time. Maybe the system's going to break, maybe it won't, but there's going to be lots of people in need over the next few months, and we have to step up as Christians and do whatever we can for them. So
Correct.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your time, Brother Kenneth, and I hope that we can be worshiping together in person very soon, and we can not get back to normal, but we can learn our lessons so that we don't have to continue these cycles again.
That's correct. Like
Alrighty.
I said, thank you again for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yep. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you. You as well. Take care.